Hi, I'm Tom Marks with the Marks Law Firm in Orlando, Florida, and welcome to the Healthy Family Law Attorney. Today we have a special guest with us, Steve Price. He's an adoption attorney. Steve has served the adoption community since 1992. Steve's a board-certified adoption attorney and a longtime member of the Florida Adoption Council. He's been the president of the FAC for 5 years, his current treasurer. Steve is a founder and partner in the law firm of Cramer, Price, and Armas. Steve is also the father of 3 adopted boys. He handles all aspects of adoption, including contested matters. Steve has represented agencies, adopting families, and biological parents, primarily in Orange, Osceola, Lake, Sumter, Seminole, and Volusia counties. So all of Central Florida. Steve, welcome aboard.
Tom, thanks for having me. Appreciate the opportunity. Always love to talk about adoption.
Well, it's great to have you on the channel. I think this is a topic that is relevant for today. A lot of people are asking questions about adoption, and I want to provide that hope and help to families to successfully navigate the family law process in a healthy way, and I know you're going to help us with that today.
It will be my pleasure to do so.
Okay, so let's start. Can you give us an overview of the adoption process in Florida?
Absolutely. So basically, there are 3 primary avenues to adopt, and that concerns private adoption, Chapter 63 in the Florida statute, which deals with adoption agencies, step-parent, relative adoptions. Then you have adoption out of the state, dependency proceedings, and that would sometimes foster families adopt, Tom, other times people adopt family members or non-family members can adopt out of Chapter 39, which is, like I said, the dependency side. The other avenue is international, and international is usually accomplished through an agency. The adoption takes place in the foreign country. The child is admitted to the states, and if they reside in Florida, the family then has the option of domesticating the adoption, and that's simply a recognition by the state of Florida of the foreign judgment of adoption. So those are the 3 types, and adoption in its essence is accomplished by 2 things. First is the termination of parental rights. And of course, this is what makes any child, be it infant or all the way up to 18. And I did neglect to mention that there is in Chapter 63 also the ability to adopt an adult. I think I omitted that. But the termination of parental rights terminates the rights of the biological parents and any other person or entity who would otherwise try to make a claim. That can be done voluntarily through the execution of consents, or it can be done involuntarily if the court finds, for instance, that a particular parent had abandoned the child. So,
Yeah, I think that's great. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, sometimes I get clients come in and they have questions, they're remarried and say the former spouse's rights have been terminated through a termination of parental rights, and they want to do a step-parent adoption, so their new spouse wants to adopt. It seems like those are a little bit easier than the other adoptions. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely, and where I was saying 2 things are involved, the termination of parental rights and then the granting of adoption. And explain the termination of parental rights. Adoption is a statutory creation. And at the conclusion of it, people come in, they're prospective adopting parents, they're petitioners on a petition for adoption. But when the court enters the final order, that child is considered born to them. They are considered blood kin. And in a real sense, Tom, a prospective adoptive parent becomes an adopting parent, becomes, in the eyes of the law, the equivalent of a biological parent. But a step-parent adoption is simpler in as much as it does not require 2 separate proceedings. And as I mentioned, the termination of parental rights and the granting of the adoption. Those 2 proceedings can be combined into one proceeding. The other nice thing about a step-parent adoption is it does not require a home study. Step-parent adoptions and relative adoptions do not require the adopting party to obtain a home study unless the court was to find it necessary for some reason.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's what happens a lot of times in cases I see that the step-parent adoption is requested, and it's quite a bit easier. There's another type of adoption. Can you tell our audience, what are the elements of a domesticated adoption?
Okay, and the domesticated is what was alluded to earlier. So if you go to a foreign country, China, for instance, and you are able to adopt in China, so the Chinese court enters that final judgment of adoption. It usually terminates parental rights, usually through the finding that the child was abandoned. But you then come back to the United States. And when you come back to the United States, you have 2 copies of all your documents. You have the official Chinese version, which is in Chinese, and then you have usually a certified translation of each document. So that's a lot for a family to carry around, candidly, when it's time to register for school or the Social Security or anything like that. So a domestication is where the state of Florida will recognize the Chinese adoption in my example, and it's a court proceeding, so the court will enter an order domesticating the adoption, and then the state of Florida will issue a certificate of foreign birth, which is the equivalent of a birth certificate. The only difference between the one Florida normally issues and the certificate of foreign birth is that the birth certificate will indicate that the child was born in a foreign country, again, in this case, China.
Okay, well, good. So can you tell our audience, what is the difference between a regular adoption and the domesticated adoption or the step-parent adoption?
So a typical Chapter 63 private adoption requires the termination of parental rights, which is a separate proceeding. The adopting family never appears in that case because it only deals with the biological parents or anybody claiming a parental right. And as I had said, these are either voluntary, and that would be done through the execution of consents by the biological mother, the execution of a consent or an affidavit of non-paternity for a putative father, or there's some other vehicles that puts a prospective or putative father on notice that if they fail to comply, then a default would be entered against them. So that proceeding starts prior to the child's birth, but it concludes, because a consent can only be executed once a child is born, it concludes after the child's born. The adoption proceeding, which does not involve the biological parents, but involves the adopting parents, all of their information is in that file. That would conclude after the termination of parental rights. In fact, it can't finalize any sooner than 30 days after the final judgment terminating parental rights is entered. As a brief aside, Tom, one of the things that I try to encourage people is that it sometimes appears that adoption is fraught with peril. And I think that primarily stems from the coverage that certain adoption cases get. And because that kind of news is flashier, it's more impactful, the court never really, or the press never really picks up how many thousands of adoptions go on all across the country every day.
That's really good to hear, Steve, because I think a lot of people are very anxious. I mean, it's a huge step in a family's life, and it's such a heartfelt thing that there can be quite a bit of anxiety. So it's good to hear that the vast majority of adoptions go really without hitch.
And anxiety, Tom, that's a great word because you're absolutely correct. And part of it's because you're dependent on other people. If you can have children biologically, I mean, certainly there's medical issues and you need to watch things, but most of those things are in your control. And with an adoption, very few of those things are actually in your control. But I never cease to be amazed at the just love commitment made by these biological mothers and sometimes biological fathers too. But this kind of living sacrifice that they're willing to do because they want what's best for their child. They want something better for their child. And a lot of times the mothers are doing it on their own. And but they know they can't be a mother and a father, and they want that for their children.
Right, right. Well, Steve, I think you have a unique perspective because you are an adoptive parent. You and your wife adopted 3 boys, and I think they're all grown now. So you've had that perspective of from the beginning to the well, not the end, but I mean they're adults now, so you've raised them. What did that give you in a kind of a unique perspective as an adoption attorney?
I think it helps in my practice, Tom, because I've been on both sides of the table. I've been the adopting parent talking to the attorney, and I've currently served as the attorney talking to the adopting parents. It's also taught me a lot in the sense, Tom, that as you and I were, out of law school and when we adopted, most adoptions were closed. And a closed adoption, and I'll just define it by my own definition, is where there is no contact information, direct contact information between biological parents and adopting parents. Usually you work through an agency or an intermediary, an attorney like myself, but the statutory word is intermediary. You communicate through there. You can even meet a biological parent today, and it can still be closed because at the end of the day, they don't know how to contact you and you don't know how to contact them directly. You have the third party that you can do that through. Today, a lot of adoptions are actually open. And open there's a range of openness, but at the end of the day, I consider an adoption open once a biological parent or parents have direct contact access to the adopting family. And that's negotiated, how that's going to be. It's not dictated, but certainly I will tell you as part of my practice that a lot of the adoptions I'm seeing now, in fact, probably most of them are open, whereas when I adopted, most of them were closed.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to my next question. So, Steve, who is your typical client? I know you represent individuals, couples, and even agencies. So tell us, or maybe work through agencies. Tell us how that works.
Well, and it's a great question. It's going to require a lawyerly answer, which means it's not short. In the termination proceeding, I generally, the bulk of my practice right now involves representing agencies, what the law calls adoption entities. And so they are licensed child placing agencies, and they are the petitioner in the termination of parental rights case. At the same time, I have that duty to the adoption entity. I also have a relationship with the adopting family because they are the petitioners in their petition for adoption. It's not the adoption entity. The adoption entity just provides supporting material recommending the finalization of the adoption. So those are it's really role-based. And in the termination side, it's generally the adoption agency where my legal representation, and we disclose that both to the entity and to the family. But in the adoption side, it would be the family. So the typical client is husband and wife that are unable to have children on their own biologically, or have had children biologically and want to add to their family. And I also have a number of families, Tom, that just feel called to make a difference in a child's life.
Well, Steve, I love the fact that you are so involved in adoption and you're involved from both sides of the table, like you said, that you have adopted and you help others adopt. And I mean, you really bring so much love and joy into people's homes and families. As part of the channel, I mean, it's called the Healthy Family Law Attorney. So the healthy is a really big part of this channel. And I always want to offer to our audience a healthy tip that you might have from your experience. Doesn't have to be, you got to eat this or that, or it can be anything from spiritual to emotional to physical or relational. So do you have a healthy tip for our audience today?
I do, and I was gonna read something because I do. Of late, Tom, you and I live close together, and we know that mornings can be a beautiful time, evenings can be a beautiful time, just watching the day start or the day end. And I'm going to read something by Lori Deschen, and it's called "Practice the Pause." Pause before judging. Pause before assuming. Pause before accusing. Pause whenever you're about to react harshly, and you'll avoid doing things, saying things you'll later regret. And I just think there's a certain power of the pause. But that pause starts when we get up, and either getting to see a sunrise or getting to start the day along with nature. But the pause, that's my healthy tip. Practice the pause.
I really like that. I think that's great because, it reminds me of the phrase, stop and smell the roses, enjoy the little things in life. And I love to work in the yard. I've got a lot of avocado trees, as you know, and other fruit trees. And you and I have known each other for more than 25 years. And so I really appreciate your professionalism, but also who you are as a person, and that all that you do for your clients and the work that you do in the community. So I wanted to thank you for that, Steve.
Well, I appreciate that, Tom, and I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time here today.
Well, this has been great. And for our audience, if you found any value in this, please hit that like button. Leave us some comments if you have some questions, any future topics that you'd like to hear me talk about or an interview on. We're still doing our legal topics on Wednesdays and the interviews on Fridays. So hit that bell icon so you know when our next video is coming out. Appreciate it. Steve, you've been great today. I love this format. I love the fact that we can provide this to the audience. So thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you, Tom.
All right. Have a great day. See you all later.
You
Bye-bye.
too.